I never thought I'd see his face again, let alone under a chandelier with champagne in his hand, pretending nothing ever broke between us. He dumped me 17 years ago, said he couldn't build a future with someone incomplete. I remember how cold his words were, how the door shut behind him like a final verdict. Back then, I cried myself empty, believing I'd never be a mother. But life has a cruel, beautiful way of rewriting its own script, so I walked into his gala that night, not to make a scene, not for revenge. I walked in with 4 living truths beside me, 4 children, 4 hearts, 4 pieces of him, staring right back at him. And that was only the beginning. I never imagined I'd see him again, especially not here, in this city where even the air seemed to hum with ghosts. Savannah had always had that kind of quiet elegance, like a woman wearing pearls in the morning light, soft, refined, but never truly still. That night, the Mercer house stood like something out of a memory. Strings of lights draped along the wrought iron balconies, the scent of magnolia, and something darker, old wood maybe, lingering in the air. There was a string quartet playing in the garden, the low timbre of the cello vibrating beneath the conversation of people with polished shoes and glasses full of champagne. It was the kind of night people dressed up for, hoping they might brush shoulders with someone important, someone they could say they met that one time in Savannah. But I wasn't here for the ambiance, nor for the handshakes and shallow compliments. This was my first appearance in public in 16 years, not because I feared the spotlight, but because I'd built a life in the shadows, quiet, intentional, fiercely protected. And now here I was again, in silk and heels, walking into a world I thought I'd left behind. I wasn't alone. They walked beside me, Noah, Jude, Ruth, and Mira, each of them tall, poised, impossibly distinct and yet unmistakably connected. The way they moved together turned heads before we even made it up the steps. I could feel it, the ripple we created, the shift in the room, like the gravity had changed ever so slightly. People didn't just stare because of how we looked, though their eyes did pause longer than polite, but because of something unspoken, a presence, a bond, a story none of them knew, but everyone could feel brushing just beneath the surface. I was prepared for the glances, for the questions behind parted lips, and the silent envy of women who thought I had it all. What I wasn't prepared for was him. I felt it before I saw him, a change in the air, a stillness. My heart hesitated in its rhythm. I turned, and there he was. Caleb Monroe. The name still curled somewhere in the soft underside of my ribs, like a bruise that had never fully healed. He stood near the archway, holding a glass of something amber, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, a familiar tension in his jaw that hadn't aged a day. His hair had gone silver at the temples, his beard trimmed close, as if trying to erase time by polishing what remained. But it was his eyes that stopped me. Still that stormy blue-gray, still too observant, too quick to search the room and find me in it. 16 years. That's how long it had been since he walked away, since he found out I couldn't have children and left without so much as a backward glance. Not even a word, just the echo of a door closing behind him, sharp and final. I remember the silence afterward, how it screamed. And now he stood there, staring at me as if the world had split open. I didn't move. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see. Every part of what he had walked away from, every heartbeat, every scar that came after him. His gaze shifted, from me to the 4 beside me. That was when it happened. The confusion. It flared in his eyes like a match struck too close to skin. I watched him try to understand what he was seeing. Noah's eyes. His eyes, cool and unreadable, but with that same stillness that Caleb had when he used to read in the mornings, sunlight catching on his eyelashes. Jude's unruly curls, the same ones Caleb had always hated to tame. Ruth's cheekbones, sharp and defiant, a mirror of mine but shaped by him. Mira's half-smile, crooked and full of questions, the same one he wore when he didn't want to admit he was wrong. He saw it. All of it, and I saw the color drain from his face. I felt Mira squeeze my hand. "Is that him, Mom?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded once, my eyes never leaving Caleb.
Yes.
Jude tilted his head.
Think he'll run?
I didn't smile. My voice came quiet but sure. No, he won't run. A man like him doesn't run. He stands, because he needs to understand more than anyone else in this room. And sure enough, Caleb started walking toward us. I watched every step, slow and calculated. I noticed the way his hand trembled around the glass, the subtle clench of his jaw, the way his eyes refused to blink, as if doing so would make us vanish. Only I would see those things. Only I knew him like that. When he stopped, just a few feet away, it felt like all of Savannah held its breath. His eyes drifted from one child to the next. I saw it happening. The breaking, the unraveling of belief, the dismantling of every narrative he'd told himself about who I was and what was possible. I watched the moment his certainty cracked, and then he spoke.
Eleanor,
he said. His voice was rougher now, aged and heavy.
I thought you couldn't.
I lifted my chin. This is Noah, I said. Jude, Ruth, Mira. Each name landed like a stone in still water. He flinched, but not visibly. Only someone who had once loved him would notice. His mouth opened, then closed again. And I knew, without him saying a word, that he was doing the math, counting years, memories, silences, wondering how much of his life had passed him by without him knowing. Finally, his voice cracked.
Are they?
I didn't answer right away. I let him sit in that question. Let him feel it. Yes, I said at last, calm as the sea before a storm. They're my children. He stepped back like I'd hit him. I watched him search each face again, desperate now, looking for escape but finding only reflection.
But you told me,
he stammered. You told me you couldn't. The doctors told us that, I cut in, my tone steady. And we believed them, once. I watched him grip the glass tighter, as if it could keep him tethered to this moment. Then, without meaning to, the question spilled out of him. Whose children are they? My answer was simple, quiet, unforgiving. Yours and mine. It was like watching a man drown in air. His breath caught, his eyes flickered from one face to another, and I saw it, the collapse. Not physical, not outward, but inside, where it mattered, where things stay broken for a very long time. Noah stepped forward then. Just a little, his voice cool, almost kind.
Whether you believe it or not, it's still true. The truth doesn't need your permission.
Caleb looked at me, then back at them. He wanted to say something, anything, but he was frozen. I let him stand there, and when he finally whispered, I need time, it wasn't a request. It was a plea. Jude gave a dry laugh. Good thing we gave you 16 years. I turned to the kids. Let's go. As we walked away, I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. His gaze stayed with us, heavy, haunted, human. In the elevator, Mira leaned into me. Will you tell him everything? I looked at our reflection in the mirrored wall, a woman who had stopped crying years ago, a woman no longer defined by what had been taken from her. Yes, I said as the doors closed, but only if he's ready to hear it, all of it, because this story wasn't over, not yet. He left the gala before midnight. I didn't see him go, but I knew. There was a stillness that came over the garden after we walked away, like something had been torn open and was now left bleeding beneath the music and laughter. Caleb had always been like that. When overwhelmed, he didn't fight or lash out. He retreated, silently, like a tide slipping back into the sea before anyone realized it had changed. But this time, I knew he wouldn't disappear for long. That night, as I tucked Mira into bed and watched the moonlight paint silver lines across the floor, I could feel him out there, awake, haunted,
probably pacing across some expensive hardwood floor, turning over every memory like a stone, desperate to find where it all went wrong. The next morning, in a sleek high-rise apartment in Charleston overlooking the harbor, Caleb Monroe sat motionless at his desk. The same one where he had signed million-dollar contracts, rejected manuscripts, and built an empire of ideas from polished wood and coffee stains. The light hit his face in that early hour kind of way, too honest to hide behind. His phone was in his hand. He stared at it for a long time before dialing. "Miles," he said quietly when the line connected. "I need you to find everything you can on Eleanor Hayes, from 2007 onward." Miles Monroe had been his assistant for nearly a decade. Discreet, surgical, efficient. He didn't ask why. He never did. "I'll get on it right away, sir," Miles replied. Caleb set the phone down. He didn't move for hours. At some point, he opened the drawer of his desk, the bottom one, the one he never let anyone else touch. Inside was a small stack of photos, aged and curling slightly at the edges. There she was, Eleanor, 28, barefoot in their old apartment, reading a book upside down just to prove a point during one of their playful arguments. Another of her laughing mid-spin under a cascade of autumn leaves in Vermont. And then there was the wedding photo. He had never thrown it away. He'd told himself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a relic of a different life. But the truth was, it was the only proof he had that once he'd been loved by someone truly extraordinary. By noon, Miles called back. "I found something unusual," he said. In late 2007, Eleanor enrolled in an experimental medical program at Mayo Clinic. Caleb sat up straighter. His heart thudded like something trapped in a cage. "What kind of program?" It was called the Ovum Regeneration Initiative, a private fertility study working with stem cells and ovarian rejuvenation therapy. Highly confidential. Only a handful of participants. She was one of the first successful cases. The words fell like ice into his chest. He whispered. "She was a mother." "She is," Miles corrected gently. Caleb stared ahead. The images in his head shifted. He saw her walking through a hospital corridor, her hand over her abdomen, maybe whispering names no one else could hear. "Anything on the children?" he asked. There was a pause. "I had to dig through encrypted files," Miles said, voice low. "Birth records, medical reports, DNA confirmation." He said their names slowly. Noah Monroe Hayes, born in March. Jude, 11 months later. Ruth, and then Mira. "All 4 biologically yours," Miles said. "Confirmed." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was absolute. Caleb sat perfectly still, as if moving would make it less real. On his screen, 4 profiles stared back at him. Photos, dates of birth, blood types, even ultrasound images. He zoomed in on one, a tiny black and white shape, a heartbeat caught on paper. It was Elena, his first daughter. And he hadn't been there. Not for her first cry, not for her first step, not even for her first birthday. He pressed a shaking hand to his mouth. The sound he made wasn't a cry. It was deeper than that. A sound that belonged in the ocean, or the woods, or in the breaking of something sacred. He stayed like that until dusk. It wasn't just the betrayal that crushed him. It was the knowledge that he had done this, that he had walked away from something that hadn't even had the chance to exist. The next morning, Caleb sat in the front seat of his car, parked along a quiet oak-lined street in Savannah. Spanish moss swayed above like a curtain between time and reality. He stared at the house, Eleanor's house, where he imagined her baking muffins, helping Mira with her science project, or sitting with Jude on the porch discussing some obscure novel. A life built entirely without him. He knocked just once. She opened the door like she'd been expecting him. No surprise, no smile, just that same quiet gravity. "Come in," she said. No invitation, no welcome, just space. He stepped inside and paused in the foyer. The house smelled like rosemary and old books. Sunlight poured through linen curtains, casting soft shadows across polished floors.
She led him into the living room and didn't offer him a seat. He remained standing, awkwardly, hands in his pockets. Every inch of the space whispered home, but not his. "You found out," she said simply. He nodded. "I needed to know," he whispered. She didn't respond right away. Then, "And now that you do?" He looked at her, really looked. "I don't know where to start." She sat down on the edge of the sofa, not relaxed, but not closed off either, just waiting. "They told me you couldn't," he said. "That day, when the doctor called. I didn't know how to stay." Her gaze didn't soften. "So you didn't." "I thought I was doing the merciful thing," he added. "Freeing you. Freeing myself." "That wasn't mercy, Caleb," she said, voice low. "That was abandonment." He closed his eyes for a second. "You're right." Just then, footsteps echoed on the stairs. The children entered, one by one, Noah with his book still in hand, Ruth holding a half-eaten apple, Jude with paint smudges on his fingers, and Mira trailing behind with a cautious expression. They all looked at him, and for a moment the room held something too big for words. He didn't speak until Eleanor gave the slightest nod. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything from you," Caleb said, his voice raw. "But I came because I need to understand. I need to listen." Ruth was the first to speak. "You think listening now erases 16 years?" "No," he said. "I don't." Jude folded his arms. "Then what do you want?" Caleb looked at them, each face a mirror of something he had lost. "I want to hear you," he said. "I want to know what I missed. I want to try, if you'll let me." Mira stepped forward, quiet but piercing. "What if we don't want you to try?" He nodded. "Then I'll respect that. I'll leave, but I'll never stop hoping." Noah finally spoke. "You didn't know about us, but you knew Mom. You knew who she was. Did it never cross your mind that if she wanted to be a mother, nothing could stop her?" Caleb's mouth opened, closed. Then, "I was afraid," he said, "and I let that fear speak louder than love." They didn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But they listened. That was more than he had expected. Later, as he stood at the door again, ready to leave, Eleanor followed him out onto the porch. "If you're here because you want to be the father of the year," she said quietly, "this won't work." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just here to be present, for as long as I'm allowed." She stared at him for a moment longer. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. And for the first time since that day he left, the door didn't close behind him. Not completely. The next time he came, he didn't ring the doorbell right away. I watched from the upstairs window as Caleb stood on the porch, one hand resting against the old wooden frame, the other clenched at his side like he was holding himself in place. There was a stillness in him I hadn't seen before, less pride, more weight. As if he understood that this time, entering wasn't a given. I let him wait, not to punish him, but to remind him this was not his story to walk into on his own terms anymore. If he wanted to be part of it, he would have to be let in. When I opened the door, he didn't smile. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," he said. "I wasn't sure I would either," I replied, stepping aside. This time, the house didn't feel as foreign to him. He glanced around the entryway, at the photos along the wall, snapshots of moments he had missed. Mira's first day of kindergarten, Jude holding up a painting in smudged hands, Ruth mid-kick in a self-defense class, Noah curled up in a chair with a book twice his size. Caleb's eyes lingered on them longer than necessary. Each image, a blade drawn cleanly across a wound he had chosen not to watch form. The children were in the living room, scattered around the old sectional couch like they always were. Noah with his tablet, Ruth on the floor tying her shoelaces, Jude sketching absent-mindedly on a pad, Mira curled up beside him, legs pulled under her. No one rose when Caleb entered, but no one left either. He stood near the door, hands clasped, waiting. I know I don't deserve to be here, he said, and I don't expect anything. I just want to listen. If that's all I'm allowed, it's more than enough. It was Jude who spoke first this time, his voice quieter than usual. Listen to what? To you. To all of you, Caleb said, eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. Whatever you want to say, or not say. I'm not here to fix anything. I need to understand what I missed. The silence that followed wasn't cold, it was cautious. Lucas, steady, always watching, set down his pencil. You really think it's that simple? No, Caleb said, but I think starting is simple. Continuing is the hard part. Ruth looked up. So why now? What's changed? Me, he said without hesitation. I've changed. I don't expect you to believe that, but I've spent 16 years hiding from the mirror, and last week I saw 4 versions of myself I couldn't ignore. That does something to a man. Mira leaned into Jude, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then she looked at me. Can he stay? I didn't answer. I looked at Caleb. This wasn't mine to decide. He seemed to understand. I'll wait outside, he said gently, turning toward the door. Take your time. He stepped out into the fading light, and the kids turned to me. What do you think? Noah asked. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap, looking at each of them, their different faces, their shared wariness. I think this is your story now, I said. Not mine. We're not asking if we want him here, Ruth said, but if we can handle him being here. Jude rubbed his temple. We grew up without a father. That wasn't a wound, it was just life. But now we know who he is, Mira whispered. And that changes everything. Not in the dramatic way she meant, perhaps, but in the quiet, invisible way tectonic plates shift beneath the earth. After a long pause, Noah stood and walked to the window. He's still standing there, he said, not looking at his phone, not pacing, just waiting. Ruth tied her other shoe. Let's not be cruel. And that was enough. I opened the door again. Caleb turned, surprised. They want to talk, I said, but there are conditions. Of course. No promises, I added. No expectations. Just presence. He nodded. Presence is all I have to give. So he came back the next day. And the next. Not like a storm returning, but like rain, soft and persistent. He never brought gifts, never asked for attention. He simply appeared, sometimes in the kitchen doorway while Mira poured cereal, or on the front steps when Noah came back from campus. He didn't impose, he didn't correct. He listened. Fully. Like someone learning a language for the first time. He asked questions, not invasive ones, but curious. Jude, what inspires your art? Ruth, how long have you been learning Krav Maga? Mira, what makes you laugh when you're sad? He even asked Noah, tactfully, respectfully, what he was reading. Noah answered, eventually, then challenged him on the interpretation. I watched them from the dining room, their voices rising and falling in debate, like they'd been doing this for years. But it wasn't always smooth. One afternoon, Ruth snapped. You can't just show up and expect us to let you in because you're biologically connected. That's not how this works. Caleb didn't flinch. I know. Then why are you still here? Because I wasn't then, and I want to be now. She left the room, but the next day, she asked him to help fix her bike chain. That's how it went. 2 steps forward, 1 back. Some days, progress looked like laughter. Other days, it looked like silence without tension. One night, after everyone had gone upstairs, I found him standing in the kitchen, staring out at the backyard. Fireflies danced along the grass. He looked different in the dim light, tired but softer. You stayed late, I said. They didn't ask me to leave. That's something. It's everything, he whispered. I poured 2 cups of tea. We sat across from each other like we used to, but without the things that used to bind us, no shared bed, no shared bank account, just history. And now, possibility. They're opening up, I said. Little by little. They're incredible. They had to be. He looked at me. You did all this, without help, without me. I had help, just not the kind you think. He nodded. You were always stronger than me. I didn't argue, because he wasn't looking for flattery. He was facing himself. You're different now, I said. Still not predictable, but less sharp, less guarded. I had to break to soften. And did you? He smiled faintly. Every day. We drank in silence. There was a peace in the air I hadn't felt in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because something new had begun, something honest, something earned. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe since he left. Maybe doors don't stay shut forever. Maybe some just take longer to open. He never knocked loudly, never arrived with flowers or declarations. Caleb returned the way dusk arrives, subtle, slow, always a little earlier than expected. He came back on a Tuesday afternoon. The air was damp from morning rain, and the porch still smelled of petrichor. I was trimming the rose bush when I saw his car pull up quietly against the curb. He stepped out wearing a navy jacket I hadn't seen before, holding nothing in his hands. I waited. He didn't speak right away, just stood at the foot of the porch, eyes flicking to the window as if hoping to catch a glimpse of someone else. I found a bookstore, he said, voice even, a little hesitant. Near the university, small, quiet. Thought Noah might like it. That was how it started. Small things, a recommendation, a note, a quiet gesture left behind. He didn't push. He didn't ask for time. He simply offered pieces of himself, fragments he'd held onto for too long, hoping they'd be accepted. Noah was the first to respond. I found them together a week later, seated at a corner table in a coffee shop near the edge of Forsyth Park. Noah had a book in his lap, The Brothers Karamazov, predictably, and Caleb was listening, really listening, the way only people who've made unforgivable mistakes know how to do. There was no lecture, no fatherly advice, just the murmur of pages and Caleb's voice asking, "Do you think Ivan was right?" Noah looked surprised, almost impressed. He answered, then argued, then challenged. They stayed for 2 hours. Jude was next, reluctantly. He'd always been the most private. His art was where he said what he couldn't voice, and I knew Caleb wouldn't be able to force his way in there. But he found a way. One Saturday, Caleb mentioned in passing that an old gallery downtown was hosting an exhibit on modern surrealism. I figured you'd hate it, he said to Jude, but sometimes hating something helps us understand why we love other things. Jude didn't answer. But the next day, I saw the two of them walking through the gallery side by side. Caleb didn't talk much, just nodded, occasionally pausing beside a piece until Jude offered a remark. When they came home, Jude tossed his sketchbook on the table and muttered, "Some of it was trash, one was decent. He didn't say anything stupid." That was his way of saying it mattered. Ruth was harder. She carried her doubt like armor, always 1 foot out the door, emotionally. One evening, she came home frustrated. The chain on her bike had slipped again. I was busy in the kitchen, but before I could speak, Caleb stepped in from the side yard. He'd overheard her. "I used to ride that same kind of model," he said. "They're notorious for that. You mind if I take a look?" She glared at him for a long second, then shrugged. "Your call." 15 minutes later, they were both on the driveway, grease-stained and muttering about tools. Ruth didn't say much, but she didn't walk away either. Mira, as always, was watching. She never asked direct questions, just observed, measured, listened to how he said things, watched how he folded his napkin, studied the way he looked at the others when they weren't looking. I knew she'd be the last to open up, but I also knew that once she did, it would be fast and full. It happened on a rainy Thursday. Her bus broke down halfway between school and home. She texted me, but I was in a meeting. Before I could even reply, Caleb had seen the alert in the shared family group chat. I hadn't even remembered he was in it, and responded, "Where are you?" 12 minutes later, he was there. He brought an umbrella and a too big raincoat that looked like it had been in his trunk for months. She didn't say much during the ride, but when she got out, she left a folded napkin in the glove box. He found it later. It said, "Thanks for showing up." He never mentioned it, never framed it or quoted it back, but I saw the way he tucked it gently into the inside pocket of his coat. I didn't interfere with any of it. I simply watched. I watched Caleb learning their rhythms, how he never tried to parent, only to understand. How he memorized Mira's favorite mug, Noah's tendency to underline in pencil only, Jude's habit of tapping the table when he was thinking, Ruth's love of lemon candy even when she denied it. He never brought gifts, but one day he arrived with an old camera Jude had once mentioned in passing. "Found it at a flea market," he said. "Didn't know if it worked." It did. He started joining family dinners, at first just on Sundays, then every other week. Always quiet, never too long. The kids never called him Dad, and he never asked. But they asked questions about his past, his work, his childhood, his favorite music, even Ruth, especially Ruth, and slowly the edge wore down, not erased, but softened. He took Noah to a poetry reading. Not his style, but he went anyway. Sat through 2 hours of verse, some bad, some brilliant, and afterward asked Noah what he thought of the metaphors. Jude asked him once, out of nowhere, "Do you regret it?" "Every day," Caleb answered without blinking. "But you never came back." "I didn't think I was welcome." "And now?" "I'm not sure I am. But I'm here anyway." That honesty, I think, mattered more than anything. With Ruth, he started playing chess. She beat him 3 times before he figured out she only played aggressively when she was upset. One day, after she lost on purpose, she muttered, "You still suck," but with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He grinned anyway. "Then I guess I've got something to work on." Mira, sweet Mira, started texting him sometimes. Nothing big. Just, "Hey, what's that song you played in the car?" Or, "You remember that book about the girl with the clock heart?" And he always responded, always. "I found it," he texted once. "It's on your porch." It was, wrapped in brown paper. No note, just there. He never crossed the line, never asked for access to decisions, never called meetings or tried to play the authority. He just existed, constant, steady, present. And the children, who had never needed him, began, in their own ways, to let him exist in their orbit. It was one evening in early fall, while I was washing dishes, that I heard them all in the living room, laughing. Noah reading out loud in a terrible accent, Jude correcting him while Mira doubled over in giggles, Ruth mock arguing over the rules of a board game, Caleb in the middle, not leading, not dominating, just belonging. And for the first time, it didn't sound strange. It didn't sound like someone new forcing their way in. It sounded like someone who had always been just one room away and finally opened the right door. I stood in the doorway for a long time. I didn't join them. I didn't need to. Because healing, I've learned, doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it shows up in laughter that doesn't pause when you walk into the room. Sometimes it arrives as a small thing. And sometimes that's where everything starts. It was Mira who asked the question that stopped everything. It happened on a Friday evening, just as the golden light began to slip between the blinds in the kitchen. I was chopping carrots for a stew, the scent of rosemary filling the air, when I heard her voice, gentle but unwavering. "Mom," she said, standing in the doorway with her hair still damp from a shower, "do you ever regret it?" I didn't look up right away. The knife stilled in my hand. I stared down at the half-sliced carrot and felt the air around me shift, like something invisible had entered the room and now waited to be addressed. Regret. That word used to haunt me. It curled itself around my ribs on sleepless nights, whispered into the silence after the kids had gone to bed, danced behind my eyes when I looked too long at old letters I never sent. But now, hearing it from Mira, my youngest, my gentlest, I felt something else. Not fear, not pain, readiness. I turned to face her, wiping my hands on a towel. "Come sit," I said softly. She slid into the kitchen chair across from me,
knees pulled up, chin resting on them. Her eyes, so much like mine but rounder, more open, watched me not with judgment, but longing, like she needed the truth not as an answer, but as a key. "What do you mean by regret?" I asked. She thought for a moment. Everything, I guess. Not telling him, not trying to find him, letting us grow up without him.
Do you ever wish it had gone differently? I took a breath. Not deep, not dramatic, just enough. I used to, I said. When you were babies, when Noah had his first fever and I sat on the bathroom floor crying because I didn't know what else to do. When Ruth broke her wrist and I had to pretend I wasn't terrified. When Jude had night terrors. When you came home from school one day and asked why other kids had dads at the science fair. She nodded slowly, remembering. But even then, I continued, it wasn't regret about having you. Never that. It was regret about silence. Mine. His. The kind that grows roots in the space between what we say and what we should say. Mira didn't speak. She just reached across the table and took my hand. Behind her, I saw Caleb standing in the hallway. He had paused just at the edge of the kitchen, out of view from Mira, but not from me. He wasn't eavesdropping, not exactly. He was listening. And for the first time, I didn't mind. Maybe he needed to hear this just as much as she did. I didn't tell him, I said, because I wanted him to come back for me, not because of what I could give him. I wanted to know if he'd still choose me, even if children weren't a possibility. And when he left, I had my answer. Mira blinked slowly. But things changed. They did, I nodded. But by then, I didn't want to chase him down and beg for space in his future. I wanted to build my own. She let out a small breath, almost like a sigh of understanding. Caleb stepped into view then, softly clearing his throat. Mira turned and didn't seem surprised to see him. "You heard?" she asked. He nodded once. "Not everything, just enough." She gave a tiny smile, one that didn't carry warmth or coldness, just clarity. "You ever regret it?" she asked him directly. The room went still. He didn't avoid the question. He didn't sigh or give a speech. He walked to the counter, set down his keys, and pulled out a chair across from us. His hands folded tightly, knuckles white. He looked at Mira with the kind of quiet I hadn't seen in him before, the kind that comes only after you've run out of lies to tell yourself. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "Every single day." She tilted her head. "What do you regret?" He looked at me, then at her, then at the shadows stretching across the tile floor. "I regret not being brave enough to stay, for letting fear speak louder than love, for walking away from someone who would have given me the world if I'd just had the courage to hold on. And most of all," his voice cracked slightly, "I regret missing your firsts. All of them. Your first breath, your first laugh, your first word." Mira didn't move, but I saw her fingers curl around the edge of the table. He continued, steadier now. "I used to think I wanted a perfect family, the kind with clear schedules and clean walls and photo frames that always matched. But what I actually needed, what I still need, are the people sitting around this table." Jude had entered without a sound. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. Noah came next, book tucked under his arm. Then Ruth, earbuds pulled out, watching from the corner. None of them spoke, but they didn't leave either. Mira's voice came soft but unflinching. "So what do you want now?" Caleb swallowed. "Just one thing, the chance to not miss anything else." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rehearsed, but it landed in the silence like a lit match in a dark room. They didn't answer, not with words, but no one walked away. That night, after the kids had gone upstairs, I found him in the kitchen again. Same spot, same distant look. "I heard everything," I said. He turned slowly. His face was open. No defenses, no pride. "They've changed," I said. He nodded. Not because of me.
No, I agreed, but maybe with you. He looked down.
It's the only thing I have left. Honesty.
I studied him, the lines in his face, the quiet apology in his eyes. And sometimes, I said, that's all it takes. He gave a faint smile. Then, the question I had buried for years rose from somewhere inside me, so quietly I wasn't sure I'd spoken it aloud.
What about you, Caleb? That day you left, was it really just about the children?
His body stilled. Even the air seemed to pause. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was barely more than a whisper.
No.
My hands tensed around the ceramic mug in front of me.
Then what was it?
His eyes met mine, not flinching.
I panicked. I looked at you, at the future, and I saw someone stronger than I could ever be. I saw a life I didn't think I could rise to. And instead of staying, I chose the path that let me leave quietly. I told myself it was mercy, but it was cowardice. The honesty didn't sting. It settled, like the final puzzle piece after years of unfinished edges. I looked at him, really looked. For the first time, I saw not the man who left me, but the man trying to return, not to the past, but to whatever was left in the wake of it.
If you had just said that, I whispered, we might have found a way.
I know, he said, and that's what I'll regret for the rest of my life.
I let the silence linger, then quietly, we can't go back.
I know. I'm not the woman who waited by the window anymore, and I'm not the man who thought he had all the time in the world. We sat like that, two people who had broken each other once, and now were trying to build something not from what was lost, but from what remained. I don't know what this is, I said, or what it could be, but if you're staying, really staying, then maybe, just maybe, we can become something else. He didn't say anything. He just reached for his mug, held it between his hands like something fragile, and nodded. And for the first time in 17 years, there was nothing between us that needed to be hidden, just one more truth laid bare, and the quiet, terrifying hope of what might come next. He didn't try to reclaim space. He didn't demand dinners or holidays or make sweeping declarations of fatherhood. Caleb returned with caution, with humility, like a man learning how to move through someone else's house without creaking the floorboards. He never crossed boundaries, never asked for more than what was freely offered. He simply showed up. There were afternoons when I'd find him on the porch, helping Mira review her science presentation. She would sit with her knees tucked beneath her, head tilted as she explained chemical bonds, and he would nod, ask questions, not as someone trying to teach, but as someone eager to learn. Some nights he played chess with Noah on the back patio. They barely spoke. A few glances, a subtle smirk, the occasional raise of an eyebrow. Theirs wasn't a connection made of words. It was built on strategy, quiet respect, and the understanding that intellect doesn't need embellishment. He went with Elena to a local photo exhibit one Saturday. They didn't stay long, but when they came back, she left a small sketch on the dining table, a pair of hands holding a camera, one large, one small. She didn't say it was him. She didn't have to. Lucas was still the hardest to reach. Sharp-tongued and skeptical, he didn't soften the way the others did. But he didn't slam doors anymore. He stopped walking out of rooms when Caleb entered. That was enough for now. And me, I didn't interfere. I stayed at the edges, like the frame around a painting, watching. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew better than to shape what wasn't mine to mold. Some nights, after the kids went to sleep, Caleb and I would share a quiet moment in the kitchen. No deep conversations, just the sounds of tea being poured, the scent of cinnamon or chamomile, the hush of night wrapping itself around old truths and new questions. He never asked to stay late, but sometimes I let him. There was a shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly, a warmth that began to return, not to our relationship, but to the air between us. He didn't try to rekindle what once was. And that, more than anything, gave it room to breathe. One evening, after the first leaves had begun to fall, I brewed 2 cups of tea and walked out to the back porch. The lights of the city shimmered in the distance, and the trees whispered low in the cooling wind. He was already there, leaning lightly against the railing. I handed him the cup. He took it, smiling softly. "This view," he said. "You used to talk about it. About sitting out here every night with the kids, a husband, and a cat named Felix." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "I hate cats." "I know," he said. "But you still said it. Back then, you thought dreaming a little might make the waiting easier." "I didn't think you remembered that." "I forgot a lot of things," he said. "But not that." We stood in silence for a while, the air between us not heavy, not empty, just still. "I don't want to go back to that time," he said, his voice low. "I know I ruined it, but if I could, I'd like to help you paint a new picture. Not the same, not perfect, just something else, something honest." I gripped my mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. But something in me, something that had gone quiet for years, stirred. A wind of hesitation, and with it, the one question I had never asked, the one I had buried beneath motherhood and strength and all the noise of becoming someone whole without him. "Caleb," I said, turning toward him, "that day you left? Was it really just about the children?" He froze, not visibly, but I saw it, the tension behind his eyes, the flicker of old fear. "No," he said. "It wasn't." The wind picked up slightly, brushing strands of hair against my face. "Then what was it?" He exhaled slowly, like the words had been sitting in his chest all this time. "I looked at you," he said, "and I saw someone unstoppable, someone who didn't need saving, and I saw a version of myself that felt small, useless. I was terrified I'd drag you down." He looked away then, into the distance. "I didn't leave because I couldn't love you without children. I left because I didn't think I was good enough to stand next to you, and I was too much of a coward to say it out loud." I closed my eyes. The honesty didn't hurt. It filled a silence I hadn't realized I was still holding. "If you had said that," I murmured, "we could have found a way." "I know," he whispered. "That's what I'll regret most." We stood in silence. Then I lifted my gaze to the skyline, to the shimmer of city lights dancing like fireflies. "We can't go back," I said. "Too much has changed. I'm not the woman who once wrote Felix's name in her diary." He chuckled softly, eyes wet with something too human to name. "And I'm not the man who thought ambition would keep him warm at night." I turned to him. "But," I said slowly, "if you truly want to stay, not for a title, not to fix what can't be fixed, but to be present, consistent, and willing to live with the unfinished—" I paused. "Let the weight settle. Then maybe we can become something else." He didn't rush to answer. He didn't reach for me. He just nodded. The quietest gesture, but the truest one. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, we stood side by side with nothing broken between us. No lies, no excuses. Just 2 people who had hurt and healed and still chose to remain. Samantha's voice would say, "Healing doesn't demand perfection. It only asks for honesty and presence. And sometimes the smallest second chances grow into something stronger than what we thought we lost." He didn't call it a return, and neither did I. Caleb simply continued showing up. Not as a father reclaiming his title, not as a man asking for redemption, but as someone willing to sit with the discomfort of his own absence and still be there when the silence lifted. There were no grand moments, no speeches or dramatic gestures, just presence. Some days, he'd walk Mira to her debate club meetings when I had a late appointment. Other times, he helped Ruth prep for her self-defense exam, holding the pads while she threw careful, precise strikes. Jude once let him sit in on a weekend painting session, said nothing,
painted in silence, then left Caleb with a blank canvas and a question. "What color do you think guilt would be?" Caleb didn't answer then. But the next week, he brought back the canvas with shades of gray, deep green, and burnt orange layered into a single blur. He didn't title it. Jude just looked once, nodded, and said, "Close enough." Noah spent the most time with him, though neither of them would admit it aloud. They debated poetry, argued over translations, watched old films in the study room with the kind of intensity most people reserve for politics or war. One night I passed by and heard them laughing, loud, unguarded, like old friends who had found each other late but still had time left. Caleb never imposed on the rest of us. He didn't ask to stay for dinner or request to join weekend traditions, but he was there. On birthdays, at Ruth's track meet, at the back of the school auditorium during Mira's piano recital, where he sat motionless while she played Debussy with a kind of quiet fury. Afterward, she didn't run to him, but she glanced back once. That was enough. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changed. They began talking about him when he wasn't around. "Caleb says there's a sandwich shop near campus. Did you see the book he dropped off? He actually remembered my art show's start time, down to the minute." The shift was small, but it was real. They didn't call him Dad, and I'm not sure they ever will. But they saw him, and they let themselves be seen. One evening, after they'd returned from a movie, I caught a moment I hadn't expected to see. Caleb standing in the hallway, arms full of jackets, waiting for the kids to pass by so he could hang them on the rack. It was the smallest gesture, mundane, almost invisible. But there was something in his posture, a softness, a quiet acceptance, that made my throat tighten. When he turned and saw me watching, he didn't speak, just smiled, not wide, not triumphant, just present. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I stood by the window with a cup of tea, watching the last lights in the neighborhood flicker out. The room behind me was dim, filled with shadows and memories, the kind of stillness that once would have unnerved me. Now it felt like a breath held just before something begins again. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Caleb. "Thank you for not closing every door." I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then pulled back. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't ready to say thank you back. Not yet. Because beneath the warmth, beneath the laughter returning like grass after a hard frost, there was still a question. One I had never dared ask, and he had never fully answered. Why did he leave, really? Was it ever about me? Or was it about him? That answer came quietly, weeks later. One early autumn evening, the sidewalk covered in leaves and the air crisp with the edge of winter, Mira came into the kitchen and dropped a single question that brought the world to a halt. "Do you think he ever really wanted us?" She didn't say it with pain or anger, just wonder, the kind that only appears when you're close enough to hope. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to find him, Caleb, in the living room, slicing apples at the counter for an old family recipe I hadn't made in years. His hands froze mid-motion. The knife tapped once against the cutting board, then stopped. He looked up, not startled, just caught. The other kids were already filtering in. Noah with his headphones, Ruth swinging her backpack off one shoulder, Jude quiet as ever. All of them standing still, watching, waiting. Mira repeated it. "Do you think you ever really wanted us?" His eyes flickered. For a moment I thought he'd deflect, offer a smile, say something vague like, "Of course I do now." But he didn't. He set down the knife, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and walked across the room to the table where they all now sat. He didn't stand above them. He pulled out a chair, sat at their level, and said very softly, "No." A sharp silence followed, then he continued. "Not because you weren't worthy, but because I was too scared to imagine something I didn't think I could handle. I didn't know what kind of father I would be. I only knew the one I had growing up, distant, cold, never enough. And I thought if that's the mold, then maybe it's better I disappear than try to fill it and fail." He paused. I didn't want you. Not because I didn't care, but because I was too broken to believe I could care without ruining something. No one spoke, not even me. Then Jude leaned back and said, So, what do you want now? Caleb looked around the table, at the faces that hadn't known him for most of their lives, and yet, somehow, mirrored everything he had lost. I want to be present, not to fix the past, just to not miss what's next. Ruth studied him like a puzzle. You know that doesn't erase anything. I know. It doesn't make you our dad. I know. Mira rested her chin on her hand. But it means something. And for once, no one disagreed. That night, after they went upstairs, I found him again in the kitchen. This time, he wasn't slicing apples. He was just sitting. Quiet, like he'd found a rhythm in stillness. They're different, I said. He nodded. So am I. Not because of what you did, but because you stopped trying to prove you were someone else. I'm just trying to be real now. I poured us both tea and sat across from him. You asked me once what I wanted, I said. Back when we stood on this porch. He looked up. And? I wanted peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, the kind that comes from not needing to fight anymore, from knowing that the past is behind us, and that whatever comes next, we face it with eyes open. And do you have that now? I thought about it. Thought about Mira's question. About Ruth's skepticism. Jude's silence. Noah's eyes. Always reading, always searching. I think we're getting there. He reached for his cup, held it steady. Then I'll keep showing up, until we do. And I believed him. Because this time, he wasn't offering promises. Just presence. And that was enough. As the days passed, life didn't become perfect. Ruth still rolled her eyes when he offered to drive her somewhere. Noah still kept boundaries. Jude still guarded his words. Mira still watched him, testing his consistency like it was a science experiment. But there were new rituals, shared playlists, inside jokes, long walks, awkward silences that turned into conversations, meals that started quiet and ended with laughter. One Sunday, they all went for ice cream. Just the 5 of them. No one called to ask me to come. No one needed to. I stayed behind, watching from the window as the car pulled out of the driveway, Mira's hand waving from the back seat. They didn't need me to mediate anymore, and maybe that was the greatest sign of all. That night, when they came home, the only thing Ruth said was, He dropped his keys at the counter, again. Jude smirked. He also mispronounced the name of every flavor. Mira giggled. And still ordered 3. Noah didn't say anything, but he lingered a little longer in the living room. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to, because it wasn't about the ice cream, or the drive, or the stories they brought back. It was about what they left behind, breadcrumbs of trust, laughter, and something dangerously close to love. Later, after they'd gone to bed, I stood at the kitchen sink, hands resting on the counter, eyes on the reflection of my own face in the window. Not the woman who had been abandoned, not the one who waited, not even the one who forgave. Just a woman. Still here. Still choosing peace every day. Behind me, my phone lit up once more. This time I replied, You're welcome, but the door is still yours to hold open. And in that, I knew the story wasn't over. But maybe, for the first time, we weren't rewriting the past. We were writing something new, together. I didn't crash his world with anger. I walked into it carrying everything he once left behind. He called me incomplete, but I raised 4 complete human beings without him. And when the truth stood in front of him, tall, proud, undeniable, he couldn't run. Not this time. Because second chances don't always come wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in consequences. So here's the question only you can answer. If someone abandoned you when you were at your lowest, would you let them back in after 17 years? Let me know in the comments, and follow for more true stories that hit where it hurts
and heal where it matters.